Welcome back to the Learn English podcast, the podcast teaching English in context so you can learn naturally. My name is Dr. C, and on today's episode, we will be discussing a holiday that is coming up this weekend, Veterans Day. I want to discuss a little bit about the history of Veterans Day, why it is celebrated on November 11th every year, and how it is celebrated in the United States. A little bit about the history of Veterans Day. Veterans Day is celebrated every year on November 11th, and the reason why goes back to World War I. World War I was the Great War. It was the war to end all wars, and it decimated the continent of Europe. The United States was a little bit hesitant to get into the war. We did not join World War I right when it started, but we did send soldiers over and we did join the war eventually. So we were present when the war ended. The war ended on November 11th, 1918, and that was the day that it was the signing of the Armistice, the truce between the Allied forces and the German forces. Now, the following year in 1919, then President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed that in the United States, November 11th would be used to celebrate and commemorate the veterans of World War I. The date was celebrated by parades and speeches and was a way to acknowledge the sacrifice and the service of those who had gone over to Europe to fight in the war. Now, World War I was considered the Great War, the war to end all wars. However, sadly, we know that it wasn't the last war, and in 1939, just 2 decades later, World War II broke out in Europe. Again, the United States was hesitant to join at first because at the time the country was recovering from World War I and the Great Depression. But eventually, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States did join and sent troops to fight in Europe and in the Pacific. My grandfather was one of those troops, and he and all of his brothers did serve during World War II. After the war ended in 1945, there was a campaign, there was an idea to change Armistice Day and have it be more inclusive, have it include all veterans who served and not just make it specific for World War I. One of the people who helped lead this campaign was Raymond Weeks. He was a veteran of World War II, and in 1947, he organized a National Veterans Day in Birmingham, Alabama. More states started adopting this policy and having November 11th be for more veterans and not just World War I veterans. And in 1954, then President Dwight Eisenhower signed that November 11th would be National Veterans Day. This change aimed to recognize all veterans who had served in the United States Armed Forces, regardless what war they had served in. November 11th continued to be celebrated and continued to have commemorations of veterans. In 1968, however, there was something called the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. Most holidays in the United States, most federal holidays are celebrated on Mondays. This means that federal employees get a 3-day weekend and that government offices are closed on those Mondays that are holidays. However, November 11th is a specific date, not a day of the week. Because of this, the day that November 11th falls on changes from year to year. For example, this year it is on a Saturday, but next year I believe it's on a Monday. So the day of the week changes every year, and to try to make it more uniform, the United States government decided to celebrate November 11th on the closest Monday and have their agencies closed on that closest Monday to the holiday. This was controversial. People did not agree that it should be celebrated on a Monday. They thought it should only be celebrated on November 11th. Others were okay with the Monday holiday and tried to tie it to a specific week. So for a time, Veterans Day was actually celebrated in October on the last Monday of October, but This didn't really stick, and eventually everything was just changed back to be on November 11th. So since 1978, Veterans Day has been celebrated on November 11th to deal with the fact that sometimes it ends on a weekend, like this year. Government offices have had this policy that if November 11th falls on a Saturday, then they are closed the previous day, that previous Friday, in celebration of Veterans Day. If November 11th falls on a Sunday, then the following Monday, November 12th, will be the day to celebrate Veterans Day, or at least the day that the federal offices are closed. This is federal government. When it comes to private businesses and private companies, it's kind of up to them how they celebrate it and how the holiday changes on the given day of the year. But in general, if November 11th falls on the weekday, it's celebrated whatever day that is. And then on the weekend, it's either celebrated on a Friday or a Monday. Veterans Day is definitely an important holiday here in the United States. It is celebrated still with parades and speeches and acknowledgments of veterans who have served in the armed forces. You will see banners and posters also going up around cities celebrating and acknowledging their local veterans. For example, I have seen cities put posters up with the picture of the local veteran, their name, maybe where they served or the years that they served. And this is just a nice way for communities to acknowledge their veterans, for people in the community to know who their veterans are and where they served or when they served. You will also see a lot of American flags out for Veterans Day. If you go to a cemetery, you might see American flags on the graves of people who were in the military. I live near a cemetery, and every year there are American flags that get put out for the veterans on the grave of those people who were veterans to acknowledge their service. This is especially true if you go to a military cemetery, which is a cemetery that only has people who were veterans buried there. For example, my grandfather is buried in a military cemetery along with one of his brothers. And if you go there during Veterans Day, you will see a lot of American flags, ceremonies to commemorate these people. You'll see a lot of visitors at that time as well, people who are going to the grave sites of their family members to acknowledge their sacrifice and really just visit their grave during Veterans Day. I hope you found this episode interesting and learned something about Veterans Day, the history of it here in the United States, and how it's celebrated. If you're here in the US around this time, be on the lookout for these celebrations in your local area and go to them. See how Veterans Day is celebrated in your community. If you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Is Veterans Day celebrated in your country, and when is it celebrated? How is it celebrated? Let me know. I would love to see how different countries celebrate and when they do. If you like this podcast, please leave a rating on whatever app you're using to listen to this podcast on. Like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode when it comes out next week. And until then, keep learning English.